No one is born inherently evil. Each person, in their own way, has the potential to become good or fall into darkness. It all depends on how they control their ego and respond to the influences around them. Some people make a single impulsive decision that sets them on a criminal path, and once they're deep into it, turning back becomes nearly impossible. Today's case will reveal hidden aspects of human nature, the internal battle between good and evil. What seems like a straightforward investigation quickly takes unexpected turns, leaving the police with surprise after surprise and suspenseful twists along the way. Stay with us until the end to uncover the shocking truth behind this case. A horrifying discovery in the mansion. At around 7 a.m. on May 2nd, 2011, Mrs. Ching, the mother of Zhu Yixing, the head of the local tax bureau in District 8, Hezhou City, Guangxi Province, arrived at her son's home to invite the family to a restaurant gathering. She stood outside and rang the doorbell for a long time, but no one came to the door. Thinking the family was still asleep, she tried calling Mr. Zhu's phone. It rang, but no one answered. She then called the home phone, only to get the same result. Assuming they may have stayed up late and were just sleeping in, Mrs. Ching decided to leave, confident they'd join later. However, as the gathering began and all the guests arrived, the only person who showed up was Mr. Zhu's housemaid, Xiao Wang. But Mr. Zhu and his family were nowhere to be seen. Worried, Mrs. Ching approached Xiao Wang to ask what was going on. The maid explained that she had slept in an upstairs room and, coming downstairs that morning, noticed the curtains on the fourth floor were still drawn. She knocked on the door, but there was no answer, so she assumed the family had already left and decided to head out herself. After hearing this, Mrs. Ching's worry turned into panic. She tried calling her son again, but still, there was no answer. As the lunch event was nearing its end, and there was still no sign of her son's family, she could no longer hold back her concern. She and Xiao Wang quickly took a car back to the house to check on things. The house was eerily silent, which only heightened Mrs. Ching's anxiety. Negative thoughts flashed through her mind as she urged Xiao Wang to open the door quickly. As soon as the door opened, Mrs. Ching rushed up to the fourth floor. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open and was instantly horrified by what she saw. Her son lay motionless on the bed, his body covered in blood. Overwhelmed with fear, Mrs. Ching screamed and collapsed, stricken by a heart attack. Hearing the commotion, Xiao Wang hurried upstairs and witnessed the terrifying scene herself. Struggling to remain calm, she helped Mrs. Ching up and called both the police and an ambulance, her voice trembling as she spoke to the dispatcher. Upon hearing the name Zhu Yixing, a government official, the police immediately recognized the gravity of the case. A team of 5 investigators was quickly dispatched to Yixing's residence. When they arrived, they saw medical personnel preparing to transport Mrs. Ching to the hospital by ambulance. The crime scene was located on the 4th floor of the mansion, with both rooms on that floor turned into sites of horror. Investigators were shocked by what they found and immediately secured the area. Mr. Zhu Yixing and his wife, Mrs. Ling Xiaoyan, had both been killed. Yixing was found on the bed with deep wounds to his neck and abdomen, his white tank top now soaked in blood. His head lay squarely on the pillow, indicating he had been attacked while sleeping. Unable to resist, the injuries suggested the weapon was a dagger or a knife with a blade around 20 centimeters long. Mrs. Yin was found dead in the corner of the room, with severe wounds to her head and chest. Her head injuries appeared to have been inflicted by a blunt object, likely a hammer. The injuries were concentrated on her face, as though the assailant harbored a deep hatred toward her. Bruising on her neck suggested strangulation, but her cause of death was determined to be multiple trauma and severe blood loss. Clues at the scene and initial police hypothesis. Based on initial observations, police suspected that Mrs. Ling Xiaoyan endured torture before she was killed. Her position in the corner of the room suggested she might have tried to escape, only to be cornered by the assailant. The police theorized that Zhu Yixing was attacked first while in a deep sleep. Unable to react, Xiaoyan, lying beside him, likely woke up and attempted to escape, but was immediately overpowered, strangled, and violently attacked. The wounds on both victims were inflicted by the same type of weapon, but Mrs. Yan's head injuries indicated a blunt object, likely a hammer, had also been used. A thorough examination of the scene revealed that Mr. and Mrs. Zhu's bedroom showed no signs of forced entry or theft. Cash, jade jewelry, and the safe were untouched. Beneath the vanity, police found a shattered, empty picture frame. In the hallway trash bin lay a crumpled photo of Mrs. Yan. In the second bedroom, investigators found two additional victims, Zhu Shui and Zhu Zhonglin, the children of Mr. Zhu and Mrs. Yan. They lay on the bed with deep wounds to the left side of their chests. The bed sheets were smooth, and the victims' straight positions suggested they had been attacked in their sleep, without a chance to resist. The wounds on Zhu Shui and Zhonglin were inflicted by two different weapons. From this detail, the police developed two theories. Either the attacker used two separate weapons to swiftly subdue both victims simultaneously, minimizing noise, or there were two assailants, each attacking one victim. The two-assailant theory gained more support, especially given the details surrounding Mrs. Yan's death. Her injuries from both a sharp object and a blunt force suggested that two individuals may have attacked her together. The bedroom of Zhu Shui and Zhu Zhonglin was undisturbed, with no signs of a struggle or search. In both rooms, the police found no foreign fingerprints, suggesting that the perpetrators wore gloves or meticulously cleaned the scene after the crime. Zhu's mansion was highly secure, with high walls lined with broken glass, and no shoe prints were found outside. The doors showed no signs of forced entry, indicating this wasn't a typical break-in. This led police to suspect the perpetrator might have been an acquaintance of the family, someone invited into the home, or possibly even in possession of a key. With all valuables untouched, the team ruled out robbery as a motive, suspecting instead that this was a vendetta aimed at Mr. Zhu or Mrs. Yan. Lacking useful leads, and with limited surveillance camera systems available at the time, the case quickly became a challenging puzzle for investigators. To encourage information from the public, the police offered a reward of 50,000 yuan for any relevant tips related to the case. The victims' complex relationships. Through their investigation, the police learned more about Zhu Yixing's family. At 44, Mr. Zhu served as the director of the local tax bureau branch in District 8 of Hezhou City, Guangxi Province. Known by colleagues and subordinates as a mild-mannered person, his job required him to navigate a complex social web. His wife, Ling Xiaoyan, also 44, was a businesswoman involved in industries like cement sales and real estate development. They had two children, Zhu Shui, 14, and Zhu Zhonglin, 15, both well-behaved, academically excellent, and adored by their teachers and friends. As the investigation team worked tirelessly to solve the brutal murders, rumors spread rapidly throughout Hezhou City. Some speculated that Mr. Zhu might have been involved in embezzlement or had workplace conflicts that led someone to seek revenge. However, investigators found that Mr. Zhu, as a branch director with a small team of only 6 subordinates, held limited power and income. Most of the family's wealth came from Mrs. Yan's business ventures, and there was no evidence suggesting that Mr. Zhu was involved in any embezzlement or bribery. Thus, the investigators dismissed the theory that he harbored deep-seated enemies. Initially, the police focused on Xiao Wang, the housemaid and the sole survivor of the incident. During questioning, Xiao Wang cried incessantly, claiming she had nothing to do with the crime. She was known to be Mr. Zhu's cousin, from a poor background, unmarried, and was being supported by the family, having worked for them for years. She was provided not only a place to stay, but also a steady salary. Neighbors described Xiao Wang as gentle and honest. Furthermore, she had a leg disability that made walking difficult, so the police concluded she was unlikely to be involved in the murders and ruled her out as a suspect. The investigation then shifted to exploring the victim's social relationships. Mrs. Yan's younger sister, Ling Xiaowan, revealed that her brother-in-law was not a faithful husband. Despite being married to her sister for many years, Mr. Zhu secretly maintained contact with an ex-girlfriend, leading Mrs. Yan to the brink of despair on several occasions. Mr. Zhu and his ex-girlfriend's husband had reportedly argued about this issue. Additionally, Mrs. Yan's relationship history was complex. She had previously been married to a man named Xiao Guang, who tried unsuccessfully to win her back when she sought a divorce. After remarrying Mr. Zhu and having 2 children, Xiao Guang recently reappeared, attempting to persuade her to return to him. Both Mr. Zhu and Mrs. Yin had extramarital relationships, causing considerable strain in their marriage. Xiao Wang mentioned that the couple frequently argued, and she sometimes overheard Mr. Zhu complaining about Mrs. Yan's habit of going out drinking at night. Conversely, Mrs. Yin was displeased with Mr. Zhu's ongoing contact with his ex-girlfriend. These marital tensions and complex relationships led the police to suspect that the massacre might have been connected to the couple's tangled personal affairs, opening new investigative angles in this mysterious case. The case's prime suspects. Based on statements from Xiao Wang and Ling Xiaowan, the investigation team identified 2 main suspect groups: Mrs. Yan's ex-husband, Xiao Guang, and Zhang Xuyan, the husband of Mr. Zhu's former lover. With additional personnel, the team split into 3 groups. One group stayed to further analyze the crime scene. The second went to investigate Xiao Guang, and the third pursued leads on Zhang Xuyan. Xiao Guang, 45 years old and currently working as a taxi driver in Hezhou, initially seemed surprised when the police arrived and claimed he knew nothing about the crime. However, when they mentioned Mrs. Yan's death, he inadvertently mentioned that her husband and children were also killed, raising police suspicions that he might be concealing something. After further questioning, Xiao Guang admitted he was aware of the murders but had pretended not to know to avoid trouble. When asked about his whereabouts around 1 a.m. on May 2nd, he explained that he was driving a passenger to District 8. Near the crime scene, the police checked his dashcam footage and confirmed his story. The second investigation team went to the home of Zhang Xuyan and discovered that he and his wife had left for Yunnan at 4:30 a.m. on May 2nd. This raised suspicions that they may have committed the crime and fled. Through questioning neighbors, the police learned that Zhang was an unemployed gambler with frequent financial arguments with his wife, Du Yin, who had a questionable relationship with Zhu Yixing. This led police to suspect that Zhang might have sought revenge. However, additional information revealed that both Zhang and Du Yin had been at the hospital caring for Zhang's mother from the night of May 1st until early morning on May 2nd, when they left with her at 4:30 a.m. Thus, both suspects had alibis. With no new leads, the investigation team returned to the crime scene for further examination. During a search, police found Mrs. Ling Xiaoyan's transaction ledger in a cabinet. She meticulously recorded daily transactions, which led the police to identify over 10 individuals with outstanding debts. However, none of these individuals emerged as suspects. A new lead from the victim's sister. Just when the case seemed to hit a dead end, Mrs. Yan's younger sister, Ling Xiaowan, disclosed a significant detail. She revealed that her husband, Li Ling, had had a financial dispute with Mrs. Yan. Although he was supposed to work as a construction supervisor for her, he was treated more like a security guard, receiving no breaks and having his requests for raises repeatedly denied. Expressing her frustration, Xiaowan said he was treated like a guard dog, always belittled by her. Based on Wan's insights, the police began to uncover more crucial details. Li Ling's background was intriguing. He had previously worked at a passenger transport center before leaving to work for his sister-in-law. Mrs. Yin had initially promised him a monthly salary of 2,000 yuan, including room and board. However, upon starting at the construction site, he received only 1,500 yuan a month, 500 yuan less than agreed upon, and was provided only with meals, not accommodation. This discrepancy raised police suspicions that Li Ling might be the culprit. However, during the investigation, he provided evidence proving his innocence, leaving the investigation at yet another dead end. At this point, the residents of Hezhou were engulfed in fear and uncertainty, wondering who the true perpetrator was and why they had committed such a heinous act against the Zhu family. People feared they could be the killer's next target, and the mounting tension added immense pressure on the police to solve the case quickly. On May 8, 2011, the Hezhou police decided to raise the reward from 50,000 to 200,000 yuan, hoping it would yield a crucial lead. Despite receiving 80 to 90 calls daily, none proved useful. A breakthrough from crime scene clues. The investigation team decided to re-examine the crime scene, and indeed, they found a new clue: a sock print on the dusty floor of the 6th floor and a partial slipper print on the 4th floor, the location of the murders. Analysis revealed that the sock print belonged to a man approximately 1.6 meters tall, while the slipper print came from a woman's size 37 slipper. Mrs. Qing and the maid identified the missing slippers as those that had once been kept by the door. From this, the police gathered more information about the suspects. There were likely at least two, a man and a woman, with the man around 1.6 meters tall and the woman under 1.65 meters. Both appeared to have a house key, suggesting familiarity with the family and prior planning. Taking advantage of the late night, the culprits had snuck into the home, committed the murders, and carefully cleaned the scene, wiping fingerprints from door handles and stair railings. The police began investigating the keys to the Zhu family's home and people close to the family. The 7-story house had multiple unused floors, with the Zhu family living on the 4th floor while the maid and Mrs. Qing occupied the 5th floor. Access to Mr. Zhu's bedroom required keys for both the main entrance and the 4th floor. All 5 sets of keys were accounted for, leading the police to suspect that a duplicate key had been made. To track down more clues, police expanded their investigation to friends and relatives of the Zhu family. 10 days after the murders, Mrs. Qing, still recovering from the shock, recalled a detail 5 months earlier. Her daughter Xiaoyan had given her a house key for a brief stay. However, not used to the environment, she had eventually gone to live with her other daughter, Ling Xiaowan, and asked Wan to return the key. This suggested that Wan had had the opportunity to keep the key and possibly duplicate it. The police immediately turned their attention to Ling Xiaowan. Her height of around 1.6 meters and shoe size 37 perfectly matched the description of the female suspect from the crime scene. The secret investigation, uncovering the identity of the perpetrator. Through a covert investigation into Ling Xiaowan's call history, police uncovered a suspicious detail. The day before the murders, Wan had called her sister. On the night of the murder, she had also made multiple calls to a young man named Lu Shengmin between 8 p.m. and 2 to 3 a.m. Further investigation revealed that Lu Shengmin was the boyfriend of Su Jie, Wan's niece. Notably, Shengmin's physical characteristics matched those of the male suspect described at the crime scene. Police were also informed that Su Jie's brother, Su Kuzhong, had been seen near the victim's house on the night of the crime. Despite having a physical disability, with mounting evidence, the police decided to apprehend Su Jie and Lu Shengmin. However, by the time they prepared to act, both Su Jie and Shengmin had left Hezhou. The two traveled from Fuzhou to Yongzhou in Hunan, then on to Zhujiang. finally reaching Dongguan in Guangdong Province. On May 18, 2011, the police successfully arrested Ling Xiaowan, Su Kuzhang, Su Jie, and Lu Shengmin at a hotel in Guangdong. Under intense questioning, Su Jie broke down in tears and confessed. She admitted that Ling Xiaowan had given her a copy of Ling Xiaoyan's house key a year earlier. Intending to duplicate it, Wan had long planned to murder her sister's entire family, though Su Jie had initially dissuaded her from acting on it. This time, however, Wan secretly convinced Su Jie's boyfriend, Lu Shengmin, to assist in carrying out the crime. After hours of denials, Ling Xiaowan finally confessed, explaining that her deep-seated resentment toward her sister drove her to plan the murders. Her motive was to secure her mother's inheritance, giving her control over the family assets. The bitterness and resentment between two sisters. Ling Xiaowan's confession left the entire investigation team stunned. Born in 1975 to a farming family in Hezhou, Guangxi, Wan was one of 5 siblings. Growing up in a large, impoverished family, she and her siblings had to leave school early and marry young. With her petite appearance and conversational skills, Wan initially enjoyed a happy marriage. Her husband provided for her every need, and she regularly sent money to support her parents back home. At that time, Wan's sister, Ling Xiaoyan, led a very different life, marked by a difficult marriage and financial hardship. After divorcing, Xiaoyan was left with nothing, no job, no assets. Out of sympathy, Wan requested money from her husband to help Xiaoyan start a business. With this support, along with Xiaoyan's own determination, she managed to build a successful life. During this period, Xiaoyan met and remarried Zhu Yixing, the director of the local tax bureau, and they created a happy home with their 2 children. Xiaoyan's business flourished, and her family grew increasingly prosperous. However, while Xiaoyan achieved the life she had always dreamed of, Wan's marriage fell apart, leaving her with nothing. Eventually, she met and remarried Li Hui, a kind-hearted but financially struggling transportation worker who couldn't match the income of her former husband. Once admired as a queen by her family, Wan now lived a modest life filled with resentment and frustration. What pained Wan most was that the title of the most accomplished daughter no longer belonged to her but had shifted to Ling Xiaoyan. Xiaoyan's continuous success, building grand homes, buying luxury cars, investing in real estate, and providing jobs for family members, earned her the admiration and dependence of the entire family. Meanwhile, Wan felt sidelined, as if she were nothing more than a puppet in her own family. Wan's bitterness and resentment grew, especially after Xiaoyan borrowed over 400,000 yuan from her for business capital, but later refused to share any profits or partnership. Wan felt entitled to a share of Xiaoyan's success, given her early support, but Xiaoyan dismissed her requests. These rejections pushed Wan's resentment to dangerous levels. When their eldest sister, Ling Xiaoping, fell gravely ill, Wan often visited her, while Xiaoyan only contributed financially to the treatment costs. This, too, fueled Wan's resentment. She saw Xiaoyan as wealthy yet stingy, unwilling to support family members in their time of need. On the night of May 1st, Wan called Xiaoyan to ask for a loan, but this time, Xiaoyan refused outright and scolded her. Her harsh words struck Wan's pride deeply, making her feel humiliated, as though she were nothing more than a beggar in her sister's eyes. The ruthless plan and final judgment. Wan's simmering fury finally erupted, and she resolved to exact her revenge. That evening, Wan contacted Su Kuzhang and Lu Shengmin, promising them 200,000 yuan each from her sister's assets, which would go to their mother upon Xiaoyan's death. Enticed by the offer, Shengmin and Zhang readily agreed. Late on the night of May 1st, 2011, the group used the duplicate key Wan had made to sneak into Zhu Yixing's house. they ruthlessly murdered all 4 family members, beginning with Yi Xing's children, followed by Yi Xing and Xiaoyan. Xiaoyan endured the most prolonged suffering and was the last to die, her pleas stifled by duct tape the killers used to silence her, rendering her unable to cry for help. Ling Xiaowan's original plan included killing her own mother to ensure that her sister's assets would be fully transferred to her. However, on the night of the murders, Mrs. Qing was at the hospital taking care of her eldest daughter, Ling Xiaoping, and was therefore spared. After the killings, Wan and her accomplices attempted to clean the crime scene, wiping fingerprints and blood from the floor and door handles, but they couldn't erase all traces. In the end, the remaining evidence became the proof that exposed their crimes. At the initial trial, Ling Xiaowan, Su Kuzhang, and Lu Shengmin were all sentenced to death. All 3 appealed, with Wan requesting a mental health evaluation, claiming her actions were driven not by money, but by a sense of abandonment by her sister. However, on April 1, 2012, the court denied the appeal, confirming that Wan and her family had no history of mental illness and that she had been fully competent when committing the crime. As a result, her request for a psychological evaluation was dismissed, and the death sentence was carried out in January 2013. This case was a tragedy not only for the victim's family, but also for Ling Xiaowan and her own loved ones. Wan's bitterness led her down a path of crime and destruction, driven by impulsive thoughts and deep-seated resentment. Both sisters had their flaws. Xiaoyan, with her focus on wealth and occasional stinginess, and Wan, with her extreme envy and hostility. In the end, these unresolved issues between them spiraled into disaster. Wan's accomplices, blinded by material greed, ultimately paid a high price for their ruthless actions. What are your thoughts on the perpetrators and the victims in today's case? Share your comments below to join the discussion with us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Decoder Box so you don't miss more intriguing cases from around the world. Goodbye, and see you in our next video.